Do you remember when smartphones were cameras? It was a time before TikTok, before Instagram Reels, and before YouTube Shorts. A simpler time perhaps, in what some would call the calm before the storm. And one of the most important transition periods in tech as a whole. They have recently risen again in popularity somewhat, and here's why they'll never happen again. Hey guys, I'm Ryan Thomas and I grew up with film cameras. A very few posh family and friends with cash to burn would buy the digital point and shoot cameras early on. And then eventually it seems like every family had a little cheap, what is now affectionately called a digicam. These were superb because not only were they smaller and easier to maintain, but they also meant that you could take a photo and simply load it up onto your desktop or laptop and either have it printed, put on a DVD, or shared via email, eventually of course social media. Because early smartphone cameras were functional but not necessarily the most powerful or versatile pieces of kit. We're talking anywhere from 0.5 to 5 megapixel on microscopic sensors with basically no processing and definitely no image stabilization. So there was a genuine slot in the market and a gap in people's pockets, purses and bags for a dedicated point and shoot camera. But then companies started realizing the possibility of having a digital camera that was also connected to the internet. And we had stuff like the Samsung Galaxy K Zoom, the S4 Zoom, and the Galaxy camera line. These looked like digicams, but had a full touchscreen on the back, and of course ran Android. Fun fact, Android was actually initially meant to be a camera operating system, but then pivoted towards smartphones early in its development, which is quite interesting. But these cameras had a real place for about 5 minutes, because by the time these companies had designed, developed, and then manufactured these things, smartphone cameras were improving fast. The Galaxy camera, for example, released in 2012, by which point we had already had our hands on the likes of the iPhone 5, Galaxy S3, and several HTC phones. Sure, these phone cameras were miles behind what we have today, but they were good enough that people were willing to give up that bit of quality for the convenience of not needing an additional device to carry around and being able to share photos with pretty much everyone via social media instantly. Point and shoot digital cameras, affordable ones at the very least, were never really groundbreaking in quality, especially compared to film anyway, so it was an easier decision for most people than you might first think. Why have something this thick in your pocket when you really don't need to? I mean, look at the quality of the images from this very camera, the Galaxy camera. Sure, it has a 21 times optical zoom, which is quite impressive even in 2024. And I'm sure there are many out there that would prefer something like this as opposed to the overly processed images we have these days. And we will come back to this point later. This camera's photos were pretty impressive, but certainly not insane for the time. But the overall lack of dynamic range, digital sharpness, and broad colours meant that the average person, i.e. not a camera enthusiast, wasn't too blown away. We started to understand a couple of years after the likes of the Galaxy camera that processing would really be the way forward. And actually in 2016, when Google unveiled its debut Pixel, the world got on board with this concept. The Pixel 1 and the Galaxy camera shared the same sized sensor, but the HDR Plus of the camera software on the Pixel really blew the Galaxy cam out of the water in areas that the average person cared about. Not everyone really needs to zoom in 21 times anyway. Suddenly, people didn't need to carry around a phone twice as thick with a dinner plate strapped to the back, and instead we would have more subtle camera protrusions and rely on the software and processing to do the heavy lifting and deliver marvelous photos. Fast forward a few more years and the hardware development spurred on by Huawei, Sony and Samsung to allow our still relatively thin smartphones to contain almost 1-inch sensors, well over double the size of something you'd find in this, in a smaller chassis, meant that quality was no longer an issue. Actually, combining these bigger sensors with the more cutting edge processing has come to a point where flagship smartphones these days, they're way better quality than even pretty expensive point and shoot cameras back in the day. I mean, 4K 120, 8K video, 50 megapixel photos. Oh, and that's before the whole AI augmentation trends that has swept across the smartphone market. Yeah, that's insane amounts of progress in really not that long at all. We've sort of seen smartphones whose camera hardware is the focal point since the Galaxy camera. I'm thinking the likes of Nokia and Microsoft's Lumia 1020 sort of spring to mind. And I guess if we're talking about Nokia, maybe the 9 PureView deserves a mention also, whatever disaster this was. I guess the P30 Pro is also a massive deal, but again, that's just more like a smartphone with a really good camera, less so a smartphone camera. And then more recently, the Vivo X100 Ultra was a complete bomb drop, but again, that's more of a smartphone with a great camera, not a digicam hybrid. But there has been a small resurgence for these little cameras, what TikTokers are calling digicams, because there is a movement involving those who want to disconnect, off the grid, detach themselves from the likes of social media and the online world. And I totally get that as someone whose job it is to basically live online and connect with those digitally. This movement has brought back a small amount of demand for these little digicams and hybrids just like this. And I've seen discourse online about how it would be great if Samsung just came back to the market with a new version of the Galaxy camera with sensors and lens technology that we've developed over the past over a decade since it came out. Some people like the standard digicam style images because of their lack of heavy artificial processing, because they look more natural, more analog, more true to life, and a grand departure from what we're used to these days. The novelty of having something that doesn't look perfect or optimized in a world that seems to do everything it possibly can do to achieve the optimum. You only have to look at the low stock and crazy scalping prices of the likes of Fuji's X100 camera series to really understand how these more analogish digital cameras have become crazy popular in recent times. However, aside from some more niche startups and the likes of Fujifilm as I just mentioned, I don't see a return of digicams or these hybrid style cameras in the mainstream anytime soon, and that's because the general public have voted with their wallets. They are buying smartphones and not buying cameras. Smartphone cameras are the ultimate point and shoot. There really is no waiting around for something to turn on or even waiting for the lens to zoom all the way in. It is instant with smartphones. It is incredibly convenient. And that's before all of that processing that happens in a split second after you hit that virtual shutter button. There's all manner of things going on in the background, like balancing the HDR with multiple exposures, color processing, facial enhancements, all in a matter of a second. And then you get a final product that not only are people happy to share on social media, but also kind of print and then even frame and hang up in their house, because the quality is just what they want. People want efficiency and, most importantly, convenience. It has been proven that the majority of the world seems happy to give up its freedoms, money, work, data, whatever you really like, just for convenience. And when you have a phone in your pocket that can take such effortlessly good photos, why would anyone want something like this? Please do let me know your stories with the early digicams and then maybe the hybrids in the comments, because I would love to hear all you have to say about them. And also what you make of some of the sample images that I took with the Galaxy camera. I know the approach is largely very different to what we do these days with crazy processing. And also I loved making this video. You guys already know I love smartphone cameras, so giving me the opportunity to just sort of play around with them for a little bit was such a blast. While you're down there in the comments, be sure to hit like if you enjoyed today's video and subscribe to never miss another upload. I've been Ryan Thomas and I will catch you later. Cheers.